What is happening here?
There's nothing left to say right now about that.
For years, Kody and Robyn Brown presented themselves as the emotional and financial stabilizers of the sister-wife's family. While other marriages fractured publicly, their relationship was framed as the one that worked. But behind the scenes, a very different story was unfolding, one buried under loans, mortgages, legal filings, and a growing financial imbalance that would eventually raise serious questions about debt, responsibility, and transparency. This is where the real story begins. Long before viewers started questioning Robyn's spending or Kody's financial decision-making, the warning signs were already there. The Browns were never financially stable in the traditional sense. They moved often, relied on combined incomes, and juggled multiple households. But after Robyn entered the family, the financial structure shifted, and not quietly. Robyn came into the marriage with debt. That fact has been acknowledged publicly. Credit cards, personal expenses, and financial obligations were absorbed into the family pot. At the time, this was framed as an act of unity, one family, shared responsibility. But what was never clearly explained was how that debt would be managed or how future spending would be controlled. Instead, what followed was escalation, multiple home purchases, larger properties, higher monthly obligations, and fewer shared resources. As the family grew more divided emotionally, it also became fragmented financially. Christine and Janelle increasingly managed independently. Mary invested in her own business ventures. But Kody and Robyn moved in the opposite direction, consolidating resources, centralizing decision-making, and committing to long-term financial obligations that required constant income flow. The most glaring example was Robyn's Flagstaff home. While other wives rented or downsized, Robyn and Kody purchased a massive property valued near the upper end of the market. This wasn't a temporary solution. It was a long-term mortgage with significant upkeep costs, taxes, and maintenance, all dependent on continued income from the show and family resources. This decision raised eyebrows even among fans who had supported them. Why commit to such a large financial burden during a time of family instability? Why prioritize one household's comfort while others struggled or left? And most importantly, where was the money coming from? As the years passed, cracks began to show. Legal filings, public records, and past bankruptcies resurfaced in fan discussions. Questions emerged about how often Kody and Robyn had relied on debt as a safety net rather than a last resort. The idea of bankruptcy, once seen as a thing of the past, started to feel uncomfortably relevant again. The $750,000 figure didn't appear overnight. It emerged from layered obligations, mortgage balances, prior debts, refinance liabilities, and lifestyle costs that never truly decreased, even as the family itself fell apart. What makes this situation especially concerning is timing. Within just a few years, Kody lost the financial contributions of Christine, then Janelle, and effectively Mary as well. The family's shared income, once distributed across multiple households, narrowed dramatically. Yet Robyn and Kody's financial commitments didn't shrink to match reality. That mismatch is where risk lives. Without the buffer of multiple incomes, even manageable debt can become dangerous. And when obligations approach $750,000, the margin for error becomes razor thin. Any disruption, show cancellation, reduced contracts, legal expenses, could trigger financial collapse. This is why fans started asking the unthinkable question, could Kody and Robyn face bankruptcy again? The possibility isn't rooted in speculation alone. It's rooted in patterns. Historically, financial stress in the Brown family has been addressed reactively rather than strategically. Moves were made quickly, assets were shifted, debts were consolidated, but long-term sustainability was rarely discussed openly. And when accountability was needed, it often fell unevenly across the wives. Christine left with independence but little shared equity. Janelle walked away financially vulnerable despite years of contribution. Mary invested separately after realizing shared resources offered no security. That leaves Kody and Robyn holding the largest liabilities and the least diversified support. What complicates matters further is perception versus reality. Publicly, Kody and Robyn maintain the image of stability, emotionally aligned, financially responsible. But stability without transparency is fragile, and responsibility without shared accountability breeds resentment, both within families and among viewers. As scrutiny increased, so did skepticism. Fans began rewatching earlier seasons with fresh eyes. Statements about money felt vague, financial decisions felt unilateral, and Robyn's role shifted from misunderstood to questioned. Was she protected or prioritized? Was the debt unavoidable or accumulated through unchecked spending and emotional favoritism? And did Kody gamble the family's future to preserve one relationship? These questions don't accuse, they contextualize. They force a deeper look at how financial power operates inside plural families, especially when emotional alliances determine who is supported and who is left to fend for themselves. Part 1 isn't about judgment, it's about foundation. Because before we can understand whether bankruptcy is possible, we need to understand how the debt was built, why it was allowed to grow, and who bore the consequences along the way. And once that foundation is clear, the rest of the story becomes impossible to ignore. To understand how the Brown family arrived at the edge of a potential financial crisis, we have to go back to the beginning, before Flagstaff, before the $1 million mortgages, and before the idea of a $750,000 debt ever entered the conversation.
The roots of the problem traced directly to Robyn Brown's financial starting point and how it was absorbed into a family system that was never designed to handle imbalance. When Robyn joined the Brown family, she didn't come empty-handed. She arrived with personal debt, including credit card balances tied to everyday expenses. This wasn't framed as irresponsibility at the time. It was framed as survival, a single mother trying to get by. And in a plural family built on shared sacrifice, absorbing one wife's financial burden was presented as an act of love and unity. But what wasn't acknowledged was how unequal starting points change long-term outcomes. Mary, Janelle, and Christine had spent years contributing to a collective system. They worked, pooled resources, and lived modestly. Janelle in particular often carried the practical financial load, managing budgets and ensuring bills were paid. The system functioned because contributions and sacrifices were relatively balanced. Robyn's arrival disrupted that balance. Her debt wasn't paired with an equivalent income stream. Instead, it was integrated into the family's shared responsibility model, meaning everyone carried it, regardless of who created it. This set a precedent that would quietly repeat itself. Financial decisions benefiting one household would be justified as for the family, even when the costs were unevenly distributed. Over time, Robyn's financial footprint grew. More children meant more expenses. More stability demands meant higher housing costs. And as Kody emotionally aligned more closely with Robyn, financial decisions increasingly flowed in her direction. What was once shared responsibility slowly became centralized control. This shift didn't happen overnight. It happened through small, cumulative choices. A larger rental here, more flexibility there, a willingness to take on long-term debt because the show income made it feel manageable. But debt behaves differently than income. Income can disappear. Debt does not. As the family moved from Utah to Las Vegas and eventually to Flagstaff, the financial risks multiplied. Each move came with transaction costs, lost equity, and temporary housing expenses. Yet the family continued to operate as if income growth was guaranteed. The assumption was simple. Sister wives would continue, contracts would renew, and money would keep flowing. That assumption became the backbone of their financial strategy, and its greatest weakness. Robyn's role in this period is often misunderstood. She wasn't openly demanding luxury, but she consistently received stability. While other wives downsized, relocated, or adjusted, Robyn's household remained insulated. Her needs were treated as non-negotiable, while others were expected to adapt. This wasn't just emotional favoritism, it had financial consequences. The Flagstaff house symbolized the shift. It wasn't just expensive, it was a statement, a commitment to long-term debt at a moment when family income was becoming less diversified. While Janelle lived in temporary housing and Mary funded her own ventures, Robyn's household absorbed the largest financial investment. And once that investment was made, everything else had to support it. Mortgage payments don't pause for emotional conflict. Property taxes don't adjust for family separation. Utilities don't care who left the marriage. As Christine exited, then Janelle pulled back, the family's income structure collapsed inward, but the debt stayed put. What had once been spread across 4 households was now effectively anchored to one. This is where Robyn's early debt history becomes critical. Patterns matter. When debt is treated as manageable rather than dangerous, it becomes habitual. When financial rescue is expected, accountability weakens. And when emotional favoritism shields one household from consequences, the system stops correcting itself. Kody's role amplified this pattern. He often framed financial decisions emotionally rather than strategically. Comfort, loyalty, and perceived obedience became factors in who received support. Over time, this blurred the line between family need and personal preference. Robyn didn't just inherit the system, she benefited from its imbalance. And while there's no evidence of malicious intent, intent doesn't change outcome. The outcome was a family increasingly divided financially, with one household protected and others depleted. By the time public conversations about debt surfaced, it was already too late to reverse course easily. Refinancing, asset shifting, and restructuring only delay consequences, they don't eliminate them. The $750,000 figure represents more than money. It represents years of deferred accountability, emotional decision-making, and reliance on income that was never guaranteed. And now, with the family fractured and income sources narrowed, the risk is no longer theoretical.
As the Brown family expanded and evolved, one factor quietly reshaped every financial decision: Kody's leadership style. What began as a collaborative, plural family structure slowly transformed into a centralized system where authority, access, and approval flowed through one person. And once that happened, transparency didn't just fade, it vanished. In the early years, finances were discussed more openly. Janelle tracked budgets, expenses were debated, sacrifices were shared. No household was fully insulated from consequences, and no wife was entirely shielded from financial reality. The system wasn't perfect, but it functioned because responsibility was distributed. That balance eroded as emotional alliances shifted. Kody increasingly made decisions based on loyalty rather than logistics. Agreement became currency. Emotional alignment became leverage. Wives who questioned spending were labeled unsupportive, while those who complied were rewarded with stability and access. This dynamic fundamentally altered how money moved within the family. Financial centralization meant fewer voices in decision-making and less accountability. Major purchases, housing, relocations, refinancing, were justified as urgent or necessary, often without full consensus. Over time, wives stopped pushing back, not because concerns disappeared, but because resistance carried emotional penalties. Robyn's household became the financial anchor, not because it earned the most, but because it was prioritized. Mortgage commitments, housing stability, and long-term planning increasingly revolved around her needs. Meanwhile, other households adapted around those decisions, often at personal cost. This wasn't accidental, it was structural. When power consolidates, risk follows. Kody's leadership favored short-term emotional comfort over long-term sustainability. Decisions were framed around what felt fair or validating in the moment, rather than what protected the family as a whole. This approach created blind spots, especially around debt accumulation. As long as income remained steady, those blind spots went unnoticed. But income stability was an illusion. The show provided significant revenue, but it was volatile by nature. Contracts could change, public interest could decline, and yet financial commitments were made as if that income were permanent. The family leveraged future earnings to support present comfort, a strategy that works only as long as nothing goes wrong. Transparency suffered under this model. Wives were no longer fully informed about obligations they indirectly supported. Financial updates became fragmented. Decisions happened behind closed doors. And once trust eroded, collaboration became impossible. This breakdown had real consequences. Christine's exit wasn't just emotional, it was financial. She walked away without shared equity. Janelle's departure revealed just how little security she had despite years of contribution. Mary's independence emerged from necessity, not freedom. Each exit reduced the family's financial resilience. Yet the largest obligations remained. Kody didn't adjust strategy to reflect the new reality. Instead, he doubled down on existing commitments, believing stability would return if emotional unity could be restored. But unity built on debt is fragile, and leadership without accountability accelerates collapse. The financial system became self-reinforcing. Centralized power justified centralized spending demanded centralized loyalty, and dissent became too costly to express. By the time public concern about debt emerged, the structure was already locked in. Assets were tied up, income streams had narrowed, and decision-making was concentrated in a household that benefited most from maintaining the status quo. This is the critical turning point, because once financial transparency disappears, collapse doesn't arrive suddenly, it arrives quietly. Missed opportunities, deferred maintenance, growing balances, and eventually questions that can no longer be ignored. The move to Flagstaff was presented as a fresh start, a chance for healing, unity, and long-term stability. Publicly, it was framed as strategic. Privately, it was rushed, emotionally driven, and financially reckless. What made the Flagstaff decision so damaging wasn't just the cost, it was the timing, the execution, and the assumptions behind it. At the moment the move was proposed, the family was already stretched thin. The Las Vegas homes had not yet sold. Market conditions were uncertain. Equity was tied up. And yet, rather than consolidating or downsizing, the family committed to relocation costs that multiplied risk almost instantly. Multiple rentals, overlapping mortgages, storage costs, temporary housing expenses, all while relying on the expectation that everything would work itself out. The most critical mistake was assuming that flat debt equity would transfer smoothly into Flagstaff. Instead, the homes sat on the market far longer than anticipated. Carrying costs piled up, cash flow tightened, and rather than pause or reassess, Kody pushed forward. This decision alone locked the family into financial vulnerability. Flagstaff wasn't cheaper, it wasn't more accessible, and it wasn't flexible. It was a higher-cost market with limited rental inventory, a disastrous combination for a family needing short-term adaptability. Yet, instead of adjusting expectations, the family absorbed the shock through debt. And once again, Robyn's household was insulated. While Janelle lived in temporary arrangements and Christine adapted repeatedly, Robyn's household remained the priority. Stability for her children was treated as non-negotiable. That stability came with a price tag the rest of the family would indirectly support. The purchase of Robyn's Flagstaff home changed everything. This wasn't a modest investment. It was a long-term financial anchor with a mortgage that required consistent, high income. Property taxes, utilities, maintenance, and insurance added layers of obligation. This was not a flexible asset. It was a fixed liability. What made this especially risky was the context. The family was fracturing emotionally. Income sources were narrowing, and yet long-term debt was increasing. Instead of aligning spending with uncertainty, the family doubled down on permanence. Christine's departure shortly afterward exposed the flaw in this logic. When she left, she didn't just exit emotionally, she exited financially. Shared income shrank, shared responsibility dissolved, but the mortgage remained untouched. Janelle's situation was even more revealing. Despite years of financial contribution, she found herself without secure housing, liquid assets, or meaningful equity. Her money had been invested into land and shared expenses that she no longer controlled. The Flagstaff move had drained her financial leverage completely. This was the cost of centralization. Coyote Pass, once envisioned as the family's future, became a symbol of frozen capital, money tied up in land that generated no income and required ongoing payments. Development stalled, plans changed, and what was supposed to unite the family instead locked them into financial limbo. The Flagstaff move forced the family into a worst-case scenario, high fixed costs with declining income and no exit strategy. Every financial system needs flexibility. The Browns had none.
The emotional justification for Flagstaff that it would bring peace and unity collapsed quickly. But financial commitments don't collapse with emotions. They linger, they compound, and they demand payment regardless of family harmony. As the show continued, income masked the severity of the problem. Television money softened the blow, but it also delayed reckoning. Instead of adjusting to a smaller, more realistic financial footprint, Kody and Robyn maintained the same level of spending, assuming the show would always be there. That assumption is dangerous. Reality television is not guaranteed income. Contracts change, viewership declines, networks pivot, and once a show ends, the financial cliff is immediate. There are no severance packages, no safety nets. The Flagstaff mortgage doesn't care about ratings. By the time Mary fully disengaged financially, the family structure was effectively gone. What remained was a heavy concentration of debt tied to one household, supported by income that was becoming increasingly uncertain. This is how debt becomes unmanageable, not through one bad decision, but through a series of emotionally justified risks taken without contingency planning. The Flagstaff move magnified every existing weakness: lack of transparency, centralized authority, emotional decision-making, over-reliance on unstable income, and once magnified, those weaknesses became structural. At this point, bankruptcy stops being a distant memory and starts becoming a plausible future scenario, not because of one expense, but because recovery options shrink with every passing year. Selling the home would mean uprooting stability, downsizing would mean admitting failure, refinancing would extend risk rather than reduce it. There is no easy exit. And this is where the $750,000 figure becomes more than shocking. It becomes logical. When you combine mortgage balances, prior debts, refinanced obligations, and ongoing lifestyle costs, the number isn't sudden, it's cumulative. Flagstaff didn't create the debt, it locked it in.
The move to Flagstaff was presented as a fresh start, a chance for healing, unity, and long-term stability. Publicly, it was framed as strategic. Privately, it was rushed, emotionally driven, and financially reckless. What made the Flagstaff decision so damaging wasn't just the cost. It was the timing, the execution, and the assumptions behind it. At the moment the move was proposed, the family was already stretched thin. The Las Vegas homes had not yet sold. Market conditions were uncertain. Equity was tied up. And yet, rather than consolidating or downsizing, the family committed to relocation costs that multiplied risk almost instantly. Multiple rentals, overlapping mortgages, storage costs, temporary housing expenses, all while relying on the expectation that everything would work itself out. The most critical mistake was assuming that Las Vegas equity would transfer smoothly into Flagstaff. Instead, the home sat on the market far longer than anticipated. Carrying costs piled up, cash flow tightened, and rather than pause or reassess, Kody pushed forward. This decision alone locked the family into financial vulnerability. Flagstaff wasn't cheaper, it wasn't more accessible, and it wasn't flexible. It was a higher-cost market with limited rental inventory, a disastrous combination for a family needing short-term adaptability. Yet instead of adjusting expectations, the family absorbed the shock through debt. And once again, Robyn's household was insulated. While Janelle lived in temporary arrangements and Christine adapted repeatedly, Robyn's housing remained the priority. Stability for her children was treated as non-negotiable. That stability came with a price tag the rest of the family would indirectly support. The purchase of Robyn's Flagstaff home changed everything. This wasn't a modest investment. It was a long-term financial anchor with a mortgage that required consistent high income. Property taxes, utilities, maintenance, and insurance added layers of obligation. This was not a flexible asset. It was a fixed liability. What made this especially risky was the context. The family was fracturing emotionally, income sources were narrowing, and yet long-term debt was increasing. Instead of aligning spending with uncertainty, the family doubled down on permanence. Christine's departure shortly afterward exposed the flaw in this logic. When she left, she didn't just exit emotionally, she exited financially. Shared income shrank, shared responsibility dissolved, but the mortgage remained untouched. Janelle's situation was even more revealing. Despite years of financial contribution, she found herself with unsecured housing, liquid assets, or meaningful equity. Her money had been invested into land and shared expenses that she no longer controlled. The Flagstaff move had drained her financial leverage completely. This was the cost of centralization. Coyote Pass, once envisioned as the family's future, became a symbol of frozen capital. Money tied up in land that generated no income and required ongoing payments. Development stalled, plans changed, and what was supposed to unite the family instead locked them into financial limbo. The Flagstaff move forced the family into a worst-case scenario: high fixed costs with declining income and no exit strategy. Every financial system needs flexibility. The Browns had none. The emotional justification for Flagstaff, that it would bring peace and unity, collapsed quickly. But financial commitments don't collapse with emotions. They linger, they compound, and they demand payment regardless of family harmony. As the show continued, income masked the severity of the problem. Television money softened the blow, but it also delayed reckoning.
Instead of adjusting to a smaller, more realistic financial footprint, Kody and Robyn maintained the same level of spending, assuming the show would always be there. That assumption is dangerous. Reality television is not guaranteed income. Contracts change, viewership declines, networks pivot, and once a show ends, the financial cliff is immediate. There are no severance packages, no safety nets. The Flagstaff mortgage doesn't care about ratings. By the time Mary fully disengaged financially, the family's shared structure was effectively gone. What remained was a heavy concentration of debt tied to one household, supported by income that was becoming increasingly uncertain. This is how debt becomes unmanageable, not through one bad decision, but through a series of emotionally justified risks taken without contingency planning. The Flagstaff move magnified every existing weakness: lack of transparency, centralized authority, emotional decision-making, over-reliance on unstable income. And once magnified, those weaknesses became structural. At this point, bankruptcy stops being a distant memory and starts becoming a plausible future scenario, not because of one expense, but because recovery options shrink with every passing year. Selling the home would mean uprooting stability. Downsizing would mean admitting failure. Refinancing would extend risk rather than reduce it. There is no easy exit. And this is where the $750,000 figure becomes more than shocking. It becomes logical. When you combine mortgage balances, prior debts, refinanced obligations, and ongoing lifestyle costs, the number isn't sudden. It's cumulative. Flagstaff didn't create the debt, it locked it in. That left Kody and Robyn holding the heaviest liabilities and the least flexibility. By the time Coyote Pass had frozen capital and Flagstaff carried heavy mortgage obligations, Kody and Robyn's financial stability was increasingly dependent on one critical factor: reality TV income. The Sister Wife show had provided a consistent revenue stream for years, but relying on television as a primary source of family income carries inherent risk, one that Kody and Robyn had underestimated. The show generated revenue through filming contracts, appearances, and related media deals. For years, it allowed the family to sustain large properties, cover ongoing debt, and maintain a lifestyle that, without such income, would have been impossible. But the problem was not just dependence, it was over-reliance. Every major financial decision assumed the continuation of the show, the growth of viewership, and consistent payouts, ignoring the reality that television is volatile, unpredictable, and temporary. With each passing season, the stakes grew higher. Property taxes, mortgage payments, and Coyote Pass obligations required large cash flow. Every delay in production or reduction in filming days had a domino effect on the household budget. Even minor fluctuations in income could create financial strain, forcing Kody and Robyn to shift expenses, delay payments, or rely on additional loans to cover shortfalls. Reality TV money also created a false sense of security. While the income was significant, it was not guaranteed indefinitely, nor was it flexible. Unlike a traditional salary, television contracts are tied to ratings, network decisions, and public interest. The family's centralized financial system meant that any disruption impacted the primary earners disproportionately, namely Kody and Robyn. The other wives, who had become pursuing independent income sources or had left the family, were no longer contributing to shared expenses, leaving the financial burden concentrated on a shrinking base. Robyn's household, already insulated emotionally, became insulated financially as well. This allowed the family to maintain appearances of stability on camera while quietly accumulating debt off-screen. The discrepancy between perception and reality widened as audiences assumed the family was financially secure, unaware of the mounting obligations behind the scenes. Moreover, television income encouraged continued risk-taking. Knowing that the show's money could cover ongoing obligations, Kody and Robyn were willing to commit to long-term investments, such as Coyote Pass, even when the cash flow needed to sustain them was uncertain. Instead of adjusting to the financial pressures, they leaned further on a revenue stream that, while generous, was finite and external. This over-reliance created a dangerous feedback loop. Show income allowed spending on high-cost properties, which in turn increased debt obligations. Debt obligations depended on continued show income, which depended on ratings and network approval, factors entirely outside the family's control. Any disruption in this loop could trigger immediate and severe financial consequences. Even more concerning was the lack of contingency planning. There is no public evidence of significant savings, diversified investments, or alternative income streams that could have supported Kody and Robyn if the show ended. Without these safety nets, the family was effectively one season away from financial crisis. Compounding its risk was the emotional influence on financial decisions. Kody often prioritized emotional satisfaction and household harmony over strict fiscal responsibility. Choices that reinforced stability for Robyn and her children were made even when they added financial strain. While this may have been well-intentioned, it meant that emotional alignment, rather than strategic planning, became the primary driver of financial decisions. This combination of over-reliance, emotional decision-making, and lack of contingency planning created a precarious situation. The debt was not the result of a single catastrophic mistake. It was the product of decades of layered financial decisions that, when viewed collectively, revealed a fragile and unsustainable structure. In essence, the show became both a lifeline and a ticking time bomb. It provided income to sustain appearances and obligations, But it also masked the underlying instability. And as other income contributors exited the family, that bomb became increasingly concentrated on Kody and Robyn.
Even with reality TV income flowing steadily, Kody and Robyn's financial challenges were compounded by lifestyle choices and household obligations that were neither modest nor flexible. Maintaining multiple properties, ensuring comfort for one prioritized household, and managing long-term commitments created ongoing expenses that could not be easily adjusted. The Flagstaff home, for example, required constant attention. Utilities, property taxes, maintenance, landscaping, and unexpected repairs added significant monthly costs. Large homes do not just require mortgage payments, they require active investment to retain value. Over time, these invisible expenses quietly added hundreds of dollars each month, contributing directly to the $750,000 cumulative debt. Then there were family obligations. Robyn's children, while young and dependent, created additional financial demands. School tuition, extracurricular activities, healthcare, and day-to-day living costs added layers of recurring expenses that were insulated from the other wives' households. While Christine, Janelle, and Mary had either adjusted, downsized, or left the family, Robyn's household remained the financial focal point. Every expenditure became concentrated on her stability. Lifestyle choices also played a role. Larger vehicles, frequent travel for family visits, and social obligations amplified the cost structure. While these may have seemed normal for a family in the public eye, the reality was that each expense added another financial brick to an already unstable structure. Debt management decisions compounded the problem. Loans were refinanced to cover short-term obligations, interest accrued on previous balances, and new borrowing was justified as temporary solutions. Yet these solutions were rarely temporary. Each month, the cumulative debt quietly grew. By centralizing resources and prioritizing emotional and logistical stability for one household, Kody and Robyn unintentionally created an imbalance. The financial system no longer distributed risk, it concentrated it. As other wives disengaged, fewer income streams were available to offset large obligations, leaving Kody and Robyn carrying the majority of the financial weight. Ultimately, lifestyle, property, and obligations intersected in a way that magnified vulnerability. High living standards and prioritized stability for Robyn's household were maintained at the expense of long-term flexibility. This structure left little room for error. Any disruption in income or unexpected expense could quickly push the household closer to insolvency. By now, Kody and Robyn's financial situation has reached a point where warning signs are difficult to ignore. Fans, financial analysts, and industry observers have begun piecing together clues from public records, property filings, and the family spending patterns. While the Browns have historically maintained an image of stability, these signs reveal a more precarious reality. One of the most obvious indicators is the sheer accumulation of debt. The $750,000 figure is not speculative. It represents mortgages, loans, refinancing obligations, and other liabilities stacked over years. When analyzed alongside income from the reality show and other ventures, it becomes clear that the debt-to-income ratio is dangerously high. Traditional financial planning suggests that households should carry no more than 30 to 40% of their annual income in long-term debt. For Kody and Robyn, estimates indicate they may be approaching or exceeding 100%, leaving little room for error. Another warning sign comes from property management patterns. The Flagstaff home and Coyote Pass land have both been tied up in long-term obligations that produce no immediate liquidity. Carrying costs are ongoing, while the potential to sell or liquidate assets quickly is limited. This lack of flexibility is a classic precursor to financial strain or potential bankruptcy. Public filings, though limited, provide further insight. Legal documents hint at liens, ongoing mortgage refinances, and possibly deferred payments, all of which suggest the family is managing obligations reactively rather than strategically. These are not red flags in isolation, but together they paint a concerning picture of financial stress. Fan analyses have also contributed to understanding the situation. Longtime viewers have tracked patterns of spending, property purchases, and household prioritization. Many note that Robyn's household has been insulated repeatedly, while other wives either exited or became financially independent. This centralization of risk, combined with continued high spending, reinforces the possibility that Kody and Robyn could face a financial tipping point if revenue declines or unexpected expenses arise. Behavioral indicators are equally telling. Delays in payments, increased reliance on refinancing, and the prioritization of emotionally significant expenditures over practical financial planning are patterns consistent with households approaching financial instability. It's a convergence of emotional decision-making and financial overextension that puts them at heightened risk. If trends continue, experts suggest that Kody and Robyn could face bankruptcy within the next 3 years.
This would not necessarily be the result of a single catastrophic event, but rather the culmination of decades of compounding debt, over-reliance on show income, and prioritization of one household's comfort over long-term financial planning. However, this scenario is not inevitable. Potential solutions exist, including downsizing, liquidating non-essential assets, restructuring debt with long-term planning, or diversifying income streams beyond reality TV. The key question remains, will Kody and Robyn take proactive steps, or will they continue to rely on temporary solutions that delay the inevitable? As we reach the final part of this exposé, it's clear that Kody and Robyn's financial situation is the product of decades of layered decisions, emotional prioritization, centralized control, accumulated debt, and over-reliance on reality TV income. Yet despite the seriousness of the situation, there remain paths forward if they are willing to act strategically and decisively. The first potential outcome is continued debt accumulation without intervention. If Kody and Robyn maintain the same spending patterns, rely exclusively on television revenue, and continue prioritizing emotional comfort over fiscal discipline, the $750,000 debt could grow further. Interest, property maintenance, and living expenses will continue to compound, making recovery increasingly difficult. This scenario could ultimately lead to bankruptcy, forced property sales, or liquidation of assets on unfavorable terms. The second potential outcome is proactive restructuring. By downsizing the Flagstaff property, reassessing obligations at Coyote Pass, and consolidating or eliminating high-interest debt, the Browns could regain financial stability. This approach requires transparency, willingness to make difficult emotional decisions, and collaboration between Kody and Robyn to prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term comfort. Financial advisors often recommend developing a multi-year plan with strict budgeting, diversified income streams, and contingency funds for unexpected expenses, all steps that could stabilize the household without sacrificing core needs. Another potential outcome involves diversification of income. Reality TV income, while significant, is volatile. Exploring alternative revenue sources, business ventures, investments, or passive income opportunities could reduce dependence on a single, unpredictable source. This strategy also creates a buffer against economic fluctuations or changes in public interest, reducing the risk of financial collapse. The long-term implications of these decisions extend beyond numbers. Financial instability constrain relationships, magnify emotional conflict, and affect household harmony. Kody and Robyn must balance fiscal responsibility with family dynamics, ensuring that solutions do not undermine trust or emotional well-being. Decisions made now will determine whether their household can remain secure or whether debt and mismanagement will force major life changes. Finally, the story of Kody and Robyn offers broader lessons about plural families, shared responsibility, and financial management. Centralized control without accountability, emotional prioritization without planning, and over-reliance on a single income source create vulnerabilities that compound over time. Recovery is possible, but only with honest assessment, structural changes, and disciplined implementation. In conclusion, Kody and Robyn's $750,000 debt is not just a number, it's a reflection of decades of choices, patterns, and prioritization. The next few years will reveal whether they can navigate these challenges successfully, or whether the combination of debt, lifestyle, and dependency on volatile income will push them into a financial crisis. One thing is certain, the decisions they make now will shape not only their financial future, but the stability of their household for years to come.